Hello there and welcome back to Maluna for the next part of the Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where we're getting ever closer to producing yet another science pack, which will, I think, bring us up to number 7, but I shall citation needed myself in the on-screen notes for that one. So in the last video, I talked about how we've managed to get all this wood up and being produced. And as you can see, there is a nice steady stream of it coming out here, and it's getting crushed down into crushed wood, cellulose, and then turned into petroleum gas, among other things. There's a whole thing going on over here. And the petroleum gas then pours down this pipe all the way along to here, where it's filling up this tank. And I've put the tank over here mostly because I didn't leave enough space for it over here, and so this seemed like quite a good place to put it. With the sulfuric acid, I've got a pump on the output of this area, pumping it out when there's enough. Over here, I've done it the opposite way around, just to be different, you know. So I've got a cable coming from the tank here, and it's telling these machines to run whenever there is more than 15,000 in this tank. So you can see they're running in little bursts. We're getting a little bit of plastic out each time, and so currently the limiting factor is the petroleum gas production rate. And looking at the belt over here, we seem to have plenty of wood at the moment, so I think that means this whole area around here needs some sort of level of expansion. We need to have a look at the lights on these machines and work out why we're not getting quite as much petroleum gas as we might like to. And looking at these chemical plants, well, they've got green lights on them pretty much exclusively. Oh, up here we've got some yellow lights. Why are you yellow? Oh, because you've filled up on this gun. Ah, I see. Yep, there's an underground pipe missing there. So we put that in, and, well, I'll put one there in case I expand any further, although there's a uranium mine in the way, so I probably won't. But yes, if I put those pipes in, and then wait for the bots to bring them over, then we'll, instead of having only 2 of these sections running and producing the petroleum gas, we'll be able to get all 4 of them running, and that will be rather nice, and then we'll get, significantly more coming through. And that might then mean that the wood production starts to become the limiting factor. I don't know, we'll let that run for a moment or two, and see how it goes. But yes, that should increase the amount of petroleum gas and the amount of diluted bitumen we've got being produced. So if we look over here now, we may see that there is... It feels like there's more plastic coming out. Oh, that's because it's mostly being pulled out here. It's hard to say. But that is certainly, in the long run, is going to improve the amount of petroleum gas we produce. So, let's carry on. We are producing the plastic in order to make circuits. So, we've had some copy-paste going on around here. So this is the same system we had for making the red circuits over on Norvis. This is the same system we had for making the belts over on Norvis as well. And so now this is allowing us to make some green belts because we've got the iron and the aluminium coming in. So yes, we're making aluminium cables in order to make the green circuits, but that's fine. That is an equivalent recipe. They're being fed round here to be made into the red circuits, and then we have some red circuits coming out over here in order to then allow us to try and build blue circuits. Now, interestingly, over here, the limiting factor for the blue circuits appears to be the green circuits coming through, and that's limited by the amount of aluminium. So I'm a little bit surprised by that. I was expecting the plastic to be the limiting factor over here because we see there isn't a full belt of it. But oh no, looking over here, all the red circuits coming out to be made into blue and also to be made into red circuits to be put onto the bus, but that's not going anywhere, so never mind that. All of that seems to be pretty much backed up, except for the green circuit production over here, which is really struggling with the input aluminium. So I guess that's going to be the next thing for us to look into improving next time, because, well, having said that, we do have quite a lot of blue circuits here. They are being produced faster than they're being used, so despite it being an apparent shortage, I think this might just be another one of those places where we are filling up buffers, and once we produce enough of those, then that'll be fine. Although it is also possible that our blue circuit consumption will increase in the future. We shall see how that goes. But yes, this is circuit production, and Tristan has followed my general design philosophy of having green circuits being produced for making red circuits, and then separately having green circuits being produced for making blue circuits. We don't have a separate feed of just green circuits being fed out. Apparently maybe we reckoned we didn't really need them, or rather, more specifically, maybe we reckoned that we were making enough of them over here off the bus anyway, so this is our green circuit supply coming along here merrily, and then not being used for the others, because using your main green circuit production to try and make red and blue circuits is just an exercise in frustration, because it's never fast enough. You always run out of green circuits. So yes, that's green circuit production. Then we've got red circuit production here, and then we've got blue circuit production in the middle being fed by separate red and green circuit production. So it's all kept separate so that you can keep the speed up and running nice and quickly. So that's all very good. I like that. This is designed with the future in mind, although we haven't actually used any of these red circuits yet. And then that's all fairly standard vanilla stuff, but then down here we're getting on to making the space science packs, and this is what everything that we've been doing has been working towards. The only part of the factory that we actually really need on this planet is the bit that will produce the rockets and the space science to go in them, and as you can see this is actually currently caught up because we're not really using the white science packs very much because we haven't really got to the point of transporting them as fast as we would like to yet. And so making the science and sending it away, there's two main parts of it. One of the parts is repeatedly making rockets, and that requires low density structures, which we've got running over here, and this is very close to the standard vanilla recipe, except that we're using the aluminium version of it, which is approximately the same, but instead of copper it uses aluminium because that's what's available on this planet, so that's fine, that makes a lot of sense. So we've just got a strip of machines along here, and hopefully these should be able to make the low density structures fast enough for us to keep producing the rockets at the rate we need to for the to keep us sciencing at our intended rate, which I'll talk about in a second. Then down here we've got the same sort of thing with rocket fuel. Now this is again an interesting one because instead of the standard generic vanilla rocket fuel recipe where you use light oil and solid fuel, and the solid fuel can be made from light oil or petroleum gas or heavy oil, and the light oil is generally the best if you can make enough of it, or rather if you can prevent your petroleum from overflowing. Rather than using that, we're using the ALICE propellant method here, which is short for aluminium ice method. So we're using crushed alumina, and that's what I talked about being made over here in the last video. We're crushing the alumina down to make crushed alumina, no surprise there, and in the future, once we've developed molten metal smelting, we'll be able to then turn that into aluminium, but not yet. That is not a recipe we've unlocked yet. So at the moment, the crushed alumina is only useful for the ALICE propellant method. We have to turn the original alumina into the aluminium over here, as we are doing, and not doing enough of, as we discussed. But the crushed alumina can be taken away all the way over to the other side of the base over here, where it gets combined with the ice and water from melting ice in these chemical plants, and that produces rocket fuel. So it's a completely different recipe. I wouldn't like to say anything about how this works from a chemical point of view, but it works from a Factorio point of view and allows us to produce the rocket fuel out on this moon. So that's working well. Over here we've got a nice happy stream of steel and plastic and aluminium coming in. Now the aluminium is not backed up, but there is plenty of it coming in. We've got it's backed up on one side, so you know there's no shortages there. The plastic seems to be doing pretty well. I think we could still do with more. I would be happier if we had a bit more of it, because I would like to see this belt backed up all the way back to production, but it's working. There don't seem to be any problems there. And ice, well, we've talked about ice as being a bit of an issue in the past, but right now, well, there's a lot of it on this belt coming along here, so at the moment, cautiously optimistic seems to be alright. So yeah, I'm not going to complain about this one right now. And that's being fed, yes, that's being fed in over here. We've got some splitters because we need it in 3 different places over here, but you know, it's a nice simple design going on. We've got some coming in to be melted into water, cross pipes going in over here, because as I've discussed previously with these machines, with the assembly machines, they have their fluid input in the middle, and that means you can't do the sort of patterns I would normally do with chemical plants. Like chemical plants, if I wanted to put some inserters along them as well, then maybe I'd come along here and I'd have chemical plants like that, and then I'd link these two together with pipes, and then I'd put my undergrounds on either side like this, and then there's still room to put in an inserter here without having to have the pipes go across and out of the way. However, because these ones have the water input in the middle, you can't do that, so you have to have this underground pipe system going over to the other side of the belts, and so on and so on. It's fine, it's easy enough to build, but it does cost a bit more iron because underground pipes are quite a lot more expensive, and you're using a set of underground pipes for every machine instead of every other machine. But you know, it's infrastructure build up. It's not that expensive. It's not a big deal because we do finally have enough iron. We were having some problems with the iron production rate earlier when we're trying to make enormous quantities of red belts mostly, but as you can see, that is now lovely and caught up. And in fact, looking along the iron belt here, yeah, we just seem to have enough iron now. Everything is caught up. Everything is working well. The iron has caught up, and all of that is going well. We just could do with a bit more aluminium. And we've got quite a lot of alumina coming through, so I think we could probably put in additional aluminium smelting along here. Maybe just a copy of a big chunk of this, like that. And then obviously fill in the gaps in the belts like this. Now I might have gone slightly over what the input belt can manage here. I didn't do any maths, as you saw. I just dropped them in and went, that'll do. Let's see what happens. But if it works, or even if it doesn't work, we're going to get more aluminium coming out. It might not be enough. It might not be quite enough to fill up the output belt completely, but it'll be better. Anyway, yes. So over here, yes, the iron producing iron for this sort of thing is fine, so we don't need to worry about that, and that is allowing us to produce the propellant. The next and final thing on this planet is the space science packs themselves, and we've been aiming for a rate of 1.5 per second for all of our science packs so far, and I think that's going fairly well. And if I drag the rate calculator across here, you'll see that we're producing, well, we're actually producing 1.9 per second because the maths was difficult. These are produced at some sort of weird speed. If we look in here, you can see it takes 7 seconds to craft them, to craft 2 of them, and I got lazy about doing the maths and getting it precise, so I've gone slightly over, but that's okay. We will at some point probably want to upgrade all of this anyway. And at the moment, as I sort of said earlier, we're currently completely filling up the rockets anyway, and we don't have the infrastructure yet to take them from orbit over to Norvis. There is some configuration is required on the spaceship in order to tell it when to go, when to come back, and all that sort of thing. Make sure it never runs out of fuel. All of that important stuff. But over here, we can make our rockets. You'll also notice we've got lots and lots of productivity modules in the rocket silos because, well, all of these things, especially the blue circuits, are quite expensive and a little bit difficult to make because of the difficulties with making plastic, because of the wood, because of the ice, and so on, all the way back up the chain. So making these as efficiently as possible is going to be very, very worthwhile. And this is giving us a plus 32% to our rocket production productivity, meaning that for every 3 rockets we build, we get another one free, pretty much. The recipe for the white science, the space science, is pretty similar to the vanilla one. We're taking in ice and iron plate and carbon, which I believe is the original vanilla recipe, but we're also taking in glass as well, and I'm kind of glad about that because that's pretty much the only sink we have on the sand being produced here. So as I discussed in the previous video, when we're making the ice over here, we are producing a lot of sand as a byproduct, and that has to be dealt with, and we've been struggling to deal with it a bit. At the moment, I've gone in and cleared out the belts a little bit, so we've got a bit of room at the moment. We'll have to wait and see whether it jams up again. But the only thing we can do with sand is turn it into glass. And okay, we use a small amount of glass for infrastructure building, so for making lamps and possibly for making greenhouses and that sort of thing. There's a little bit of glass getting used up for those, but mostly it just sits there on the belt, and the only thing it's used for, follow the belt all the way down here, is for producing the science packs. So what we need to do is produce science as quickly as possible in order to use up the glass as quickly as possible. However, producing the science also uses a certain amount of the ice, which means it'll produce a bit of sand, and taking the science off this planet also uses a certain amount of plastic and ice and more ice. Oh, and blue circuits, of course, as well, to make the rockets. Now, I'm cautiously optimistic that once we get everything running, especially now that we're using the low water recipe for producing the wood, that the closed system of producing science and shipping it off the planet is going to be either sand neutral or sand negative, in that we will hopefully be using up the sand as fast as we're generating it, or maybe even faster, in which case we'll have to top it up a little bit with the stone that comes from up here. Although I think at the moment, yes, we've got that disconnected, so hopefully we're not actually getting any stone out of the mines up here, because that would just make things even worse. There is also, as you see, a little bit of stone coming out of the iron ore production over here, so that's another slight supply of stone, which then, well, we're turning a lot of that into landfill, but then if that ever overflows, we are then going to dump it down here to be crushed down into even more sand. So that's another thing we need to worry about a little bit. But as I say, I am cautiously optimistic that we will get into a position where we can keep the sand being used up as fast as it's generated. Although I notice we've now filled up with glass, so this belt is starting to fill up. Yeah, it's tricky. I am a little bit concerned about this, but we will see how it goes. Kristen has also pointed out that we can make some massive improvements to the amount of ice we're getting through by going in and putting productivity modules or possibly overclock modules in just about everywhere. So if we go through, we can put in 3 in the machines melting the ice, we could put in 4 in the greenhouses, and then another 4 in the crushers, and 3 in the chemical plants making the cellulose, another 3 in the chemical plants making the petroleum gas, another 3 in the chemical plants making the plastic, and then 2 in each of the stages of circuit production. That's the red circuits and the blue circuits, and then another 2 in each of the machines making the low density structures. So I thought I'd go through and add up how much of an improvement that would make, and it would knock about 60% off the amount of water we're using, which is a big improvement. So I think that's definitely going to be worth looking into. The only problem is, if we went through and put the productivity modules in all of those machines, that would take more than 500 productivity modules or overclock modules to fill all of these machines up. We don't need to use all of them because some of these machines that are making the circuits aren't being used, for example. We'd be sensible and careful about it. But we're still looking at several hundred of these productivity modules, and each one of those requires red circuits and green circuits, 5 of each, and so that means that if we did want to do that, we would have to produce something like 7.5 3,500 green circuits in order to make the red circuits and the green circuits that we needed. And there would need a huge amount of plastic and more aluminium and so on as well to make the red circuits. So it's an expensive suggestion, and also it would massively increase the amount of electricity we're using. Although, if we look at the amount we've been producing and consuming along here, for quite a long time we've been producing, well, 45 megawatts from the solar and an additional 45-ish from the nuclear. So that's coming up to call it about 100. So if we doubled that, then we would be looking at 200 out of the 600 or so we're capable of producing. It's not an unreasonable amount of power. We might well be able to do that. So it's certainly a thing we'll consider. Maybe the best way to do it would be to think about where we could strategically put them in and where they'd be most useful. And that usually means wherever you've got the fewest machines for an individual step. So here, for example, for the water melting, we've got 32 chemical plants working, and each one of which takes 3 modules. So that'll be 100 modules to fully module up that step. Similarly with the greenhouses, we've got 27 of those and they take 4 each, so we're looking at over 100 there as well. But some of the more streamlined stages, like over here where we're making the plastic, that's only 3 chemical plants. So that would only require 9 productivity modules to give us a reasonably significant boost across that entire stage. Similarly, the low density structures, there's not a huge number of machines there, so we could give that a bit of a boost. Maybe we'll find that we don't need all of these machines making the red circuits or the blue circuits, so we could put little boosts in there. And these, by going through and being sort of sensible about it, picking the smaller stages, we might be able to get a decent amount of improvement without needing an absolutely enormous amount of productivity modules. So I think that's worth thinking about. Over at the other end, over on Norvis, Mark has set up a system with a cargo landing pad here to unload the white science onto a belt here, which means it can then be passed around and dumped into the science labs over here, which have now all been upgraded to have overclock modules in them. These are the ones that increase your productivity without reducing your speed, but give you an extra penalty on energy consumption. But we've got plenty of energy on Norvis, so we reckoned that this was actually worth having. Now, we could just expand the number of labs to get over the speed penalty, but that means you end up having to use more modules and it's a bit more expensive, so we thought we've got plenty of power, let's just go with that method. And anyway, yes, that's unloading them here, so they can be passed around into the labs. And so far, we have done a grand total of 1 research that requires the white science pack. We've done the Covrex enrichment process, and this was done by controlling the spaceship manually in order to bring some of those packs over, so we can get them. So because we wanted to get started, get them being used, and that's allowed us, as I say, to generate the Covrex enrichment process, which is going to be very useful in the future. The next ones, the production and utility science packs, those require steam science in order to produce them, and we haven't got that being brought over yet, so that's going to be a plan for the future. But as of right now, we're at least able to do anything that requires white science but not steam science, and there's fewer things that fit that than you would expect, which is why the research is currently quiet. And that brings you up to date on the current state of Maluna. We've had a few comments and thoughts from some of the others about how things have gone out here. Mike has an interesting thought, which I think I may have echoed at some points during this run. But one of the weird things about this planet is how easy the science pack was for that we need to generate. If you look over here, the space science pack is just ice, iron plate, glass, and carbon. The ice comes straight out of crushing oxide chunks. The carbon comes straight out of crushing carbonic chunks. The iron plate, the iron ore comes straight out of crushing the metallic chunks, and then you have to cook that to get the iron plate, so that's pretty easy. And the glass is just get the stone or the sand that comes out as byproducts, crush the stone if necessary, cook it into glass and ship it over. All of those are pretty trivial. They're very, very easy to make. However, it's the rest of the infrastructure around them that you need to actually get stuff off the planet that's the interesting and difficult part. Producing all the bits and pieces to make the actual rockets to launch them, that's far more complex. Okay, so the steel was easy. The aluminium was easy. That was just crush another type of a rock and then cook the output of that, and you get aluminium. Fine. Ice is pretty easy. The alumina, pretty easy. So, okay, maybe it's fair to say the rocket fuel was quite straightforward, because that's just ice and alumina, and that's not too bad. But the other two things, the plastic in order to make the low density structures and the blue circuits, required massive amounts of infrastructure in order to get them working. Okay, over here we've built with the intention of making a sort of a mall setup, so all of the buildings we might need down here and the belts over here, sure, they are part of it. But a major part of the infrastructure we built, all of this stuff here making the wood, is there essentially to make the plastic, or at least to make the petroleum gas to make the plastic. And then all of this is for making the belts, and there's a lot of other resources being flowed in here. So All of this is basically in order to make the plastic, to make the circuits and the low density structures in order to make the actual rockets themselves. So those have been the difficult part of it. And so that brings up the option of doing it in a slightly simpler way. Rather than trying to build all of this stuff on this planet, we could potentially have shipped over our blue circuits and our low density structures and maybe even our rocket fuel from Norvis, drop that down into a landing pad and had that feed straight into the rocket silos here. And then on this planet, the only thing we would have to make would be these science packs. Now, I'm sure we'd run into some sort of clog with trying to make all of these things in balance. I don't know. Or maybe making the glass would be enough to use up the sand and the stone that comes out from the iron and the ice making. I'm not sure, but we could, and we'd have some coal left over as well. But I'm sure those few things could probably be disposed of somewhere. So it's very interesting that the science pack itself was basically trivial. It's just producing the stuff to get it off the planet that's harder. And so maybe it would have been more sensible to say, we're not going to bother to build up at all this infrastructure on this planet. We're going to be really, really lazy. We're going to ship in the blue circuits and the low density structures from somewhere else and just go, yeah, we'll just lob it up into orbit and we'll have a tiny little outpost that just crushes some rocks and makes some white science. And we did have that idea. Mark was asking us why we weren't doing that pretty much from the beginning, because he's sensible. But there is also a certain amount of satisfaction, I think, in making a planet that is self-sufficient, that can launch its own rockets full of science out without needing inputs from elsewhere, and can build all of its own infrastructure and buildings and so on. So this entire factory has essentially been bootstrapped from what was on this planet. Yes, I think Tristan and Mike came in with a few mining drills and a few crushers and bits and pieces like that, and we brought in quite a lot of belts in the early days. But all of the stuff here is certainly capable of being produced on this planet, with the possible exception of the solar panels and accumulators. I think we brought those in, all of them. But that said, we could make them here. Solar panels we wouldn't be able to make because that requires copper, and there is no supply of copper on Maluna. That said, I noticed there is an alternative recipe over here. This is from Silicon Cell, which is a Maluna recipe. Where it said so somewhere. If I hover over here, yes, you can see that's a Maluna recipe. That requires glass, which is nice. We want to get rid of that, and electronic circuits, fine, aluminium, fine, but silicon cells, we haven't invented those yet. Those are hidden behind purple science, unfortunately. So, but potentially in the future, we'll be able to make large quantities of solar panels on Maluna with silicon and ship. Maybe we'll export them from here if they're really, really cheap. We shall see. Those silicon cells require electronic circuits and silicon. Silicon comes from coal, sand, and steam. Yeah, this seems like another possible sink for the sand we've got. Maybe that's going to be a thing, and Maluna will become the galaxy-wide source for solar panels in the future. We shall see. Accumulators, I suspect, might have a similar problem, and there doesn't seem to be an alternative recipe for these. The iron is no problem, but I think the batteries, yes, the batteries require copper as well. So potentially we could ship copper out here, and then we'd be able to make the rest of everything else from there. But I don't think it's going to be worth it. You will probably find it's cheaper just to ship the accumulators over, or maybe ship the batteries over to make accumulators, because it's normally cheaper to ship the finished products over than it is to ship the components. Anyway, that's got a little bit away from what Mike was saying. I got distracted and started talking about making things on this planet. But yes, he's definitely saying that it's interesting that the problem out on Maluna is very much with making the infrastructure, and just how slow it was to get the wood supply up and running and get the iron supply up and running well enough to get a good supply of belts coming through. And then sort of everything else sort of hinged on that. I do remember that through the streams for quite a long time we were really, really struggling to get enough belts together, and so that was that was very much the limiting factor. Now, I also noticed that having put in those extra pipes over here, we've now got to the point where we're using up the wood pretty much as fast as it's being produced. So I think that now means that the wood is no longer the supply issue here. But that probably means that over here, yes, we're now producing plastic significantly faster. We could start putting this onto the near side of the belt as well. That will allow us to put a bit more out. But we've got now a virtually full, in fact, a virtually full tank of petroleum gas. So that's gone really well. Putting in those extra underground pipes and unbottlenecking the system has, unsurprisingly, helped quite a lot. So yeah, that's now looking a lot better. I think I'm pretty happy with that. Meanwhile, the sand has jammed back up again. It's not quite, it's got to the point where it's starting to interfere a little bit with the ice flow, but we do have quite a lot of wood available now, so maybe it's going to be okay. We're just going to have to wait and see. Sophia has said that he thinks he's been looking at the Norvis-Maluna interactions, and Sophia hasn't actually been out to Maluna yet, so a lot of what he's gathered is just from us talking about it. And actually, that was as a side note, was something we'd sort of reckon is a bit of a shame, that Sophia and Mark never actually made it to Maluna before it was basically finished. So we're going to have a little bit of a play around with how we try and organise moving people to different planets, so everyone gets a chance to have a look at every planet at some point on the way through, and rather than having people being trapped on over on Norvis, because there's quite a lot of stuff to get up and running over there as well. But yes, he thinks it's a nice idea. It's nice that they sort of interact together, in that we are having to think about producing wood because of Lignumis on Maluna, even though it's a different mod, and that there are some extra sort of mods and tweaks that to make the two sort of work together, like having the greenhouses. I'm not sure how Maluna works if you don't have Lignumis involved as well. I don't know where the plastic comes from in order to make the circuits, in order to make the rockets. I'd be interested to find out. Maybe I should have a look into that as well. But having the extra requirements from Lignumis has created some extra additional challenges over here, which have been interesting to sort out, should we say. And that's interesting in the same way that Dwarf Fortress is fun. No, I exaggerate. It's been fun. He did also note, though, that because of the way that some of the graphics have been tweaked for Maluna, if you look at the shadows, they're all very, very sharp, because this is a planetoid with no atmosphere. There's nothing to no clouds. There's nothing to diffuse the light that's coming in, so we get very, very sharp shadows from all these buildings. If we look over on Norvis, then okay, for the pylons, they're still pretty sharp, but they're not as sharp. And some of the sort of the more general things, like those trees down here, for example, they've got quite fuzzy shadows. And particularly if we look at Lignumis, you can see some fairly soft shadows on the assembly and the science labs, and even more so on the lumber mills. And that meant that over on Maluna, the lumber mills look slightly out of place because they've got these soft shadows, whereas all of the vanilla buildings have got much harder shadows because they've been modded to look like you don't have an atmosphere. It's not a big thing, but it does create a little bit of a sort of a disconnect with these buildings. More severely with these buildings is that these are burner tech buildings. They take in fuel, which they burn in order to do whatever it is they do, and so having these things here feels kind of wrong, because they can't, obviously you can't burn fuel when there's no atmosphere. We've got over here, yes, we've got the these machines are burning fuel but they are specifically bringing in oxygen from these buildings, from the tanks. The lumber mill is just merrily burning fuel without it. And I believe that we've updated our mods now a little bit, or there has been some updates to some compatibility mods or something like that to remove the lumber mills, or to say the lumber mills will no longer work on Maluna, which makes a lot of sense because they're supposed to be burner tech buildings. That is going to cause some issues because we're going to have to replace all of these lumber mills with assembly machines, which are slower, and more severely, they don't have the plus 50% productivity bonus, which is going to be a bit of a shame because that cut down quite a lot on the amount of wood we got through. However, we've now got to the point where we got enough, so we've kind of skipped over that problem. Sorry about that. I think that's been an update that's happened since we built all this stuff up, though. So we should probably go in and remove these lumber mills because I'm pretty sure as I say, you're not allowed to place them here anymore. Maybe I've not updated the mods yet. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, we're not allowed to use them anymore, which makes perfect sense because they are burner machines. There's a little sense putting in agricultural towers out on the planet here. Tristan has also commented on it being a bit of a shame that Mark and Sophia never really got to come out to Maluna, and it would be a bit nicer if we were all moving around together as a group. The problem basically comes down to that there wasn't really enough for us to do on this planet, and with the shortages of some of the basic resources for making things like belts and other machinery infrastructure stuff, if we'd had all 5 of us on this planet building things, it would have been even worse. We'd have had almost twice as much of a problem with not having enough stuff coming through to get built. It's a shame that they weren't able to come out to this planet with us, but I don't know quite how we're going to balance that. We will continue looking at it and continue thinking about it, however. Tristan does suggest that perhaps if we go to a planet that has enemies on it, then that's going to give extra stuff for people to do. So if we go out to a planet that has wrigglers on, like Lignumis or Gleba or something like that, then you can have some people who are in charge of going out and sort of hunting them down and making sure they don't cause any trouble. You have other people who are building things up, you have other people who are doing resource gathering, and maybe between them you can then have all of that sort of work together and there'll be enough stuff for 5 people to do. Sophia thinks that maybe we rushed off to get to a new planet too soon, and we should have stayed on Norvis for a bit longer and built up all of the infrastructure there to support us going out to other planets. This would allow us to then come out to the planets and go, right, okay, we need a lot more belts that we're just not able to produce quickly enough over here, so let's launch a dozen rockets worth of belts up to a spaceship, bring them over, drop them down onto the planet, and then we can get building for a bit more quickly. On the one hand, that would allow us to expand quite a lot more quickly and efficiently, and we wouldn't have had some of the silly problems we had here. But on the other hand, it gets away from that sort of self-sufficient planet thing I was talking about earlier, which I quite like. So I can certainly see the advantages of both. I guess we'll see how it goes, and to an extent we can leave it up to the person who's in charge of the planet. The other part of that, though, of course, is that it's much more exciting to be going off to the new planets, especially for this particular one, because previously we were on Norvis, which is obviously a very, very vanilla planet. We've all done it before, so spending loads and loads of time on Norvis was less interesting and less glamorous, and I am trying to do a streaming series here, so it was nice to go off to somewhere that's a bit more different. In the future, though, all the planets will at least be space age level of different, even if they're not modded levels of different, so it won't be quite so bad to spend a bit more time on them. So I guess we'll sort of see how it goes, play it by ear. The next thing that's going to happen is that Sophia is going to make some investigations into Vulcanus and then head over there, and basically the same sort of thing that Mike was doing with this planet. He's going to have a look at Vulcanus, decide how he wants things to work, make up a big to-do list for everybody, and then we'll head over there and start filling in the things he wants us to do, and hopefully get the planet up and running reasonably quickly. We shall see. And on that note, well, that's something to look forward to and keep an eye out for, so we will be heading out to Vulcanus fairly soon. I think there's going to be a couple more videos before I start talking about it, because I want to get something built up there, so I've got something meaty to talk about rather than just, oh look, there's Sophia standing by a volcano. Good, there's a video. But there's plenty of stuff for me to talk about around the rest of the game, so I'll be more videos every Thursday and Friday going onwards. In the meantime, there will also be streams on every Monday evening at 7:30 PM UK time, where we should be carrying on with our explorations of the solar system and trying to get lots and lots of extra planets up and running, so please come along and join us for that. I'm also still playing Foundry on Wednesdays, that's lots of fun, so yeah, again, I would appreciate if lots of people come along and watch that stream as well. I think it's an interesting game. It's got certainly some flavour of Factorio, but with some interesting differences due to the 3D of it, and there's something quite satisfying about digging a tunnel to run a belt through because you don't want it to poke up above the ground and get in the way of everything else. And I've done that a couple of times so far. So yes, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you along for all the streams and all the other videos that are coming out. I'll see you then. Bye bye.